Welcome to Veronica Live, and I am here. I'm so excited. This is a comedian, Josh Denny, and he's huge on X. That's where I bumped into him, and I had to have him on because you're also a huge pro-lifer. So welcome, Josh, to Veronica Live.
Thanks for having me.
So it was very interesting reading about you, and you have in your bio that I guess the whole world hates you, and I don't know why, because I've fallen in love with you. So that, so why does the whole world hate you? Let's start there. A comedian that makes us laugh.
Well, I mean, yeah, I just think a lot of it has to do with, politics and my political views and being outspoken about those things. So, that was kind of when I first ran into any sort of pushback in my career as a comedian was, around the time I was working for the Food Network, was right around the time that Trump had won the 2016 election. And, I had started to become a little bit more vocal on X, formerly Twitter, about, just kind of the changing of the tide in America and the fact that I felt like more conservative values were coming back into play. And, I had voted libertarian in 2016. I had always considered myself a pretty moderate conservative. Mm-hmm. And then, as we learned in 2016, the idea of that went completely out the window. And if you had any sort of conservative values, especially working in entertainment or Hollywood, you immediately became persona non grata.
And what was that like? Because, I was reading your bio, and you were huge on the Food Network, and 35 million followers, and then all of a sudden they kind of kick you in the gut and cancel you. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting to see. I mean, to this day, when I share the story about what happened over there, it kind of blows people's minds because, as you said, we had our trailer for our series launch had like 35 million views on Facebook and YouTube, and there was a ton of excitement around the show. We premiered very well. We were one of their best new shows in about 10 years, probably since the original Man vs. Food had aired. And, after the second episode of season 1, they immediately shot us into syndication in 14 other countries and ordered our second season.
That's awesome.
But then when we went into and my contract at the time was like very modest. It was my first thing. So, I wasn't bringing in the Elon Musk bucks at that point.
You weren't a diva? Josh, come on.
No, I wasn't anywhere approaching Guy Fieri money, but,
damn it.
So, we were still kind of the new kid on the block, and they had, a lot of people don't know this, and this, I talked with Shane Gillis when his cancellation happened a little bit after mine, but people don't realize that when TV networks hire new talent, they do this really deep dive on your background, not just your financial and your criminal background, but also your social media. And they had no issue with any sort of edgy jokes I had posted or anything like that leading up to me doing the show for them. The mentality was sort of like, well, we're not really in the business of comedy. We're in the business of travel and food. And, what you do as a comedian is not something we're necessarily going to promote. And, you don't have to explain it to our viewers. And the idea, I think, at the time was kind of like, Bob Saget did his thing as a comedian, was a very dark, edgy comedian, and it had nothing to do with his career as Danny Tanner on Full House. And that was kind of their attitude around it. But that all changed when Trump got elected. And there was sort of this mindset shift where if bad tweets or mean tweets, as they called them,
right,
were enough to potentially disqualify him in the minds of people from serving as president, then maybe mean tweets should disqualify everyone from their job. And, so the network kind of changed tune. And first day of filming of season 1, they had this, or season 2, they had this sort of like intervention with me, this big conference call about my political activity on X, or then Twitter.
Gosh.
And we're just kind of like, we want you to tone it down. The show's a big hit. You're going to have a huge career with us. And we don't want that to be, we don't want there to be noise around you as a host because of your political views. And I was pretty direct with them. I was just like, listen, if you guys are asking me to sell out, cut the check. Like, I'm making less money hosting this TV show than I've done from my executive jobs over the past few years. Give me 20 million over 10 years. I'll get off social media entirely, and I'll host, 5-10 shows a year for you guys, right? But if we're talking about me putting aside who I am to do this job, then this job has to change my life forever. And if that's not on the table, then I'm not interested. And they, they were pretty quiet in response to that. My agent, a guy named Max Stubblefield at UTA at the time, jokingly replies, like, you guys can feel free to counter. So there was no counter. And then what's shocking to people when they hear this story is instead they started to sabotage our show as if to like justify the fact that they weren't going to renew it despite that it was a hit. So they moved it from Food Network to Travel Channel. They moved it from Friday nights to Tuesday nights, cut our viewership down to a third, and then tried to use that as leverage to prevent me from negotiating a better deal, and leverage almost like to threaten me to say that if you don't stop, we're just going to kick you off the network entirely. And I said, okay, go ahead.
Wow.
So what do you think motivates that? I mean, they're in the business to make money. They want hit shows. And why do you think they would try to sabotage their own products?
Well, a little insight into that. A lot of people look at the Food Network and they think about the audience. The audience is, I think very conservative, because it's, for the most part, it's been pretty apolitical programming for the last 20, 30 years. And it's kind of been a safe space for conservatives on television to where they can watch stuff that doesn't feel politically preachy. But the inside DNA of the executive group in that company is they're all liberal women that make the decisions in that company. So I think they saw me as like a nice, happy-go-lucky guy that they thought would play ball. And when they started to ask me not to be myself in my private life and on social media, I pushed back. And I don't think they were expecting that. And the mentality is, we'll just go out and get another you. And they literally did that. If you look at the guy who hosted the reboot of Man vs. Food, he's like a Temu Josh Denny. They went and got another fat redheaded guy and literally just put his show in my time slot. So it was kind of funny to like really feel, you see all these things about recasting and stuff that happens with like big actors in Hollywood or beloved characters, and to watch it happen to you, like yourself, in real time is very surreal. Like I didn't even think I had been around long enough to be a type, and then they were like, just go get us another Josh Denny type.
I love redheads, Josh, because I'm married to one, so redheads rule.
I was gonna say,
go ahead.
I was going to say, it's sort of like Kathy Bates as Matlock, reimagined, right?
Yeah, and I had conversations with Bert Kreischer about this kind of before everything went sideways. Bert's a very big comedian, and we happened to have the same agent, and I bumped into him at the Burbank airport one morning, and he kind of like sat me down and gave me his experience of doing those shows and working in the network. And he goes, listen, man, like they're probably like, if you're also trying to do these shows to push your comedy career, at some point, you're going to get to a point where they're going to ask you to choose, and you're going to have to be ready to make that decision. I never thought it would happen so quickly. I mean, we were talking, this probably happened like 2 months after Bert and I had that conversation.
Well, I fell in love with you on X, and so one of the things you wrote just 2 days ago, I think the freedom of choice should be encouraged and supported in the form of all the ways pregnancy can be prevented. But at some point, we have to be consistent with our laws that ending the life of a human without consent or provocation is wrong. And you are such a pro-lifer, Josh, that I was like, oh my gosh, who's this guy? And so how did you become such a pro-lifer? And I'm telling you, you slay people when they mess with you. And I'm like, okay, I'm taking notes. How is he slaying them? Because, I'm a baby Xer, and I've been fighting, this week. You fight the pro-life people because they're like, you didn't adopt all the babies. What are you doing? And then the other thing was, and we'll talk about the DNC here shortly, is, all of those speeches, they were let's murder babies, and then the Republicans are taking their books. And I've seen these books, and they're X-rated. And so that's what I'm tired of. I got to learn from the master Jedi on how to slay these people. But how did you become such a pro-lifer? Because, you're a comedian. You're telling jokes. I watched all your stuff. It's fun. It's edgy. And then you want to save babies.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my journey, like it's my journey's not a pure one. Like, and oftentimes people who have followed my career for, over a decade know that like I've been on podcasts where I've talked about situations where I had a one night stand with a woman and encouraged her to get an abortion because I didn't want to have a child. This was when I was like 23 and very selfish. And I had bought into the same BS propaganda that we're fed, that it's not a human life and that it's, it's a woman's choice and it's healthcare and all these things they tell you. And
Right.
my journey to becoming a pro-life person really came from me being an open-minded person and having people on my podcast that didn't agree with me. And I brought on another comedian named Adam Yenzer, and he probably hates that I always have to bring his name up, but he convinced me to completely look at the argument in a different way. And then I started to do, how this happens, like somebody plants a seed in your mind and you start to really investigate it and do your own research. And I was like, wow, we're really looking at this the wrong way. And what was interesting for me that I find is that, I don't really ascribe to a particular faith. Like I'd consider myself a very religious person. I believe in God, but my partner, my girlfriend of 12 years, was raised Baha'i here in Los Angeles, which is like a progressive Middle Eastern religion. And the famous actor Rainn Wilson, who played Dwight on The Office, is a very big, probably the most prominent Baha'i. And we've gone and listened to him speak and do talks and everything else. And one of the things I found that oftentimes becomes an issue for people when discussing abortion is that it becomes about religion. And then if they're not that religion, they think they have no responsibility to it. And I started to look at it more from a constitutional perspective. And like in that quote you mentioned earlier, abortion is the only exception in American law where we allow a human being to end the life of another human being without consent or provocation, right? And so the question remains is if the 14th Amendment grants promises the American people the right to life, liberty, and property in that order, then how on earth could we have anything in law that allows people to prevent the life of another person? And there is no other circumstance where we allow this to happen. And so I just see it as an immoral inconsistency in the way we interpret the Constitution. And it is a failure of our government to do the things that the preamble of the Constitution promises the people, to promote the common welfare and to maintain the opportunity for liberty and posterity.
Well, that's just huge. I mean, you have such clarity, and you're right, because everybody's always like, "Oh, you're so religious," and then again, I always get the, why don't you have 20 of these children? But I know plenty of people that would adopt them, and I love how you slay that. So when the door closed,
the Constitution, the Constitution doesn't promise anyone an easy life, and that's the pushback I give to people that go, "Well, why don't you take care of all these children, or why do pro-lifers not care about the quality of life?" And I go, listen, that's a matter of opinion amongst conservatives. I do think as a society, we could do more we could do a lot less that government is doing and blowing money on that they have no business doing. And we could do more to promote the common welfare and to make people's lives a little bit easier in the ways that the Constitution commits to. But the Constitution does not commit to your life being easy. It doesn't mean that the government has no responsibility to make your life a cakewalk, but it does promise life. And so to me, that is the defining difference.
And it's whose definition of what's life quality. And you probably learned that firsthand going around doing your show. There's a lot of people that are into a lot of different things. Okay. and what one person thinks is, and I've run into this over the years, but as far as politics goes, you tell people like, oh, well, we have an outhouse on our farm. And people are like, oh, you have a what? And it's like, what do you think people have been doing for thousands of years? How do you think they went to the bathroom? They didn't have indoor plumbing. And you get these liberals and they think, if you don't have like, a sewage system and all this kind of stuff, that you're some kind of backwards idiot, And it was, basically what when they tried to introduce, particularly the poverty, this anti-poverty stuff, they were trying to say, hey, everybody needs to have an Elon Musk lifestyle, or Donald Trump lifestyle to have quality of life, and that's just crap. It's not that at all.
Well, you're so right about that. And for me, a real mindset shift happened when, a lot of it came from all these sort of negative things and the upheavals in my career and being kind of knocked back at different points in my life, where I learned that the thing that makes me feel the most enriched and the most wealthy is perspective. And I say this a lot on these debates when I get in with pro-choice people and we start to debate these things back and forth. But I always talk about the fact that I am much more concerned about why people think what they think than trying to convince them to think like me or trying to convince them that what they think is wrong. And I think in taking a genuine step to understand people, that makes you much more, it forces you to kind of steelman your own perspective to say, okay, if I understand why this person thinks what they think, it makes me think about why I think what I think. And that's how you really get to the bottom of what are the best ideas, regardless of what people's personal opinion might be.
Right. Very true. Well, and, what was so awful to me, and I don't know, I took one for the team, Josh. I watched 4 nights of the DNC speeches, and I'm still, my husband left the room to go watch Schitt's Creek because he's like, oh my God. And,
As a comedian, it was brutal because it was like watching a bad open mic where the person isn't getting any laughs, but they think they're killing, and you're just like, ooh, somebody get them off.
Well, what hurt me the most was every speech was like, we gotta kill babies, and then we've got, and then I don't know. They pulled up the food truck, and the first day they were so proud that they'd had 25, aborted babies, and it was every damn speech. And like you said, and I hear it all the time, that it's, health care for women. But you've been strong too, because when we know how people get pregnant. So, let's get over it, people, and stop using abortion as your birth control.
That's the real choice. Yeah. Having a baby is a consequence, not a choice.
Right.
Well, you're very...
and there are so many choices in how women can prevent pregnancy. And so really what we're talking about is like that this argument has gone every way away from the fact that, the 90% or 99% of these abortions are really just people not taking proper precaution. And I think it sets a dangerous precedent for our society to say that, like, to abscond, like to allow somebody to abscond their sense of personal responsibility will literally let you take a life as like a oopsie. I didn't plan. It's like that. And think about what that's done to our society on a larger existential level. Like the disregard we have for human life, the lack of personal accountability we have for our own choices, like the tree of destruction that has grown from the roots of allowing abortion in this society is far more destructive than just the deaths that it causes immediately. I think it's made us a horrible litmus test for what humanity is supposed to look like.
Well, you're very right on that, Josh. And you look at that, look what's going on in Ukraine. It's like, and you got to wonder, say, where are the people talking about all these people dying, particularly, women and children when they bomb a hospital and stuff. And we just kind of shrug our shoulders anymore. Like it's, well, who cares? It's just a bunch of, Ukrainians that died. And there's the humanity is missing out of all of this anymore.
So,
and I think you see this with some of these horrifying videos you'll see on X or these other platforms about, where you'll see like someone get shot in the head and people are just standing around like nothing happened. I mean, I see that as a butterfly effect of starting with this. Well, maybe it's not a life. Maybe it's healthcare.
Oh my goodness. Well, you totally get into politics, and I wanted to chat a little bit because you are a Trumper, and I've been a Trumper. I was a chair. I worked for his campaign in 2015-16. I got a lot of hate that year, which helps you grow in life when people hate you. But what are your thoughts on Kamala? I mean, she's hiding, and now she wants all these debate things, because she doesn't want to debate, in my opinion. But how does a comedian
She's copying Trump?
Yes, yeah. How do you see her?
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, I mean, well, you got to remember, I live in Los Angeles. I've lived here since 2009, so I've watched her entire political rise. And she when I used to work in business, I had great mentors, couple guys, one by the name of Rob Roline and another guy by the name of Bob Hyde. And one of the things they taught me very early on in my leadership career was you don't ever want to be one of these people that talks a lot and says nothing. And boy, is she a shining example of that. I mean, she will ramble on and she'll talk for hours and you'll be like, what did I just hear? Like, I don't think she said anything whatsoever in that 5-minute filibuster or whatever she just did. And so when you see people like that, continuing to rise in their career, that it's not about the merit of their ability. It's because she checked all these sort of identity politics boxes. And, when you listen to people on the same side politically as her talk about her record as a prosecutor and as an attorney general, like there's a great podcast with Josh Dubin of the Innocence Project on Joe Rogan talking about her blocking evidence that would have gotten an innocent man off death row. And this was entirely to preserve her record. I mean, it is the most disgusting disregard for justice and humanity. And by the way, this guy was black. This is a woman who champions herself as the savior to the black race. And she's literally like allowing innocent men to be sentenced to death because she doesn't want a loss on her record. I mean, this is like absolutely disgusting, inhumane politic BS. And to see somebody like that just go out and sort of championing all these things that her record doesn't show she cares about, it got to be enraging to the average California voter who's watched her rise.
Right. Well, that means we have to come save you from Freedom, Florida. We need to get you scheduled over here, Orlando, Miami. I'll be your manager, Jacksonville. Plus, we live in the Panhandle, so we could use you over here, Josh.
Yeah. Well, what is it, Josh? You made an interesting comment there about California. What is it that people keep voting for this stuff? I mean, they see what San Francisco has become. They see all the homeless around, yet they keep voting for more and more of it.
I got to be honest with you. I don't think they're voting for it. I think if you were to really dig into election tampering and fraud here in California, I think it would make your head spin. I think it would make your head spin. I think the amount of, I'll give you an example. I just went to get my driver's license renewed about 2 weeks ago. Okay. And when I was in there, they have these codes for, like, when you go in, you make an appointment, you're given a number. Your number is a code. It starts with a letter and then it has a number afterwards. So mine was like F35 and they have A, B, C, D, all the way to G. And I asked one of the guys working there, I go, what are the letter codes? And he goes, well, A and B are class licenses, right? So those are your commercial licenses. Everything else is a language. And the amount of people that are assigned a letter can tell you how many people here speak that specific language. And it has everything to do with how we schedule the staffing for the DMV. And so he goes, you're an F, which is English only. And so there's only one of those here today. There were 6 people there that were Spanish only. Okay. And the amount of people that were there getting driver's licenses, which allow you to vote in California, who weren't citizens, would terrify you. And you just saw the thing come out this morning. Tom Slocum, who's a regular in the Punch Bowl in the mornings, was talking about the 1.1 million voters that were pulled off the rolls in Texas because they weren't citizens. I'd be willing to bet that number in California is in the millions of illegal immigrants that are voting. And I bet they're not even voting. Their paperwork's just being turned in. And anecdotally, I can speak to in 2016 and 2020, I had like liberal friends, people I don't even communicate with anymore, who were no problem like going live on Instagram and showing video of them grabbing all the ballots out of their apartment building's mailroom and just like, I'm going to fill these all out myself.
Oh my God.
And so like actual literal like felony level election interference, and people just don't care. Like they think they're saving humanity from some evil monster, so they're willing to break any laws or rules possible.
Wow. Well, you're such a comedian in the know. So tell me your thoughts on Tim Walz. I find the guy, he is such a liar. Well, yeah. Oh my gosh! And then I saw the meme, and he was holding a huge tampon, and I almost puked because I could never say that word before until now. And but he's lied about his military record, the DUI, how he's deaf. Then yesterday, I think it was yesterday, there was a picture of Scout that was like a yellow lab, and then there was one from a few years ago. Scout was a black lab. So the dog's
And the
not
black
even
lab
real.
looked like it had been abducted, right? The black lab looks horrified in that photo. He stole someone's dog.
So how do you see? And when he comes out and he's like putting his arm up like he's like doing a Saturday Night Live dance out of the movie,
like crazy.
And then he jerks his son's hand on the stage, and I'm like, I watched the speech. It was very good. Josh, his speech was good. It was. I mean, there's never any substance in these speeches, but the delivery was quite good, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, and I again, if you have somebody who's a bumbling buffoon like Kamala, you need somebody like a Tim Walz to kind of pick up the slack. I mean, there's a reason Tim Walz is doing all the press and Kamala is like hiding out, right? So, funny enough, I lived in Minneapolis for 11 years before I moved to Los Angeles, and so I'm very familiar with Tim Walz, very familiar with the change of demographics in Minnesota that's happened over the last 20 years. I mean, it's basically become little Somalia and little Ethiopia. And so, so when you think, and there is this real groundswell, like the problem with Minnesotans are that they are the classic example of a liberal. Like we would never want to say, we could never at a dinner party in mixed company say that we feel like our city is being taken over without feeling like horrible racists. And so they just lay down and let it happen. And that's what led to George Floyd. That's what led to, the Philando Castile shooting. Like the police in Minnesota were not prepared for this civil war that was moving into their country at a rapid rate between these Somalian and Ethiopian communities that have rivaling religious beliefs. And so that's turned into violence and bloodshed. And it's gotten so bad to the point where like even native Minneapolis gangs are like trying to push back against this invasion. And so there's a ton of violence in North Minneapolis. I'd be willing to bet if you looked at the statistics from when I lived there in 2004 to until now, so 20 years ago to now, I bet the amount of violent crime would increase dramatically. And if you match that up to the amount of immigration from Eastern Africa, I bet the numbers would almost line up, neck and neck. So there's been this huge shift in the culture of Minnesota. And what Tim Walz represents is, I think, the most dangerous thing in politics today, which is like a smiling white face that's trying to sell you the evil as progress. Mm-hmm. And, for me, it's not about race. It's about ideology. I mean, The Middle East has no desire to assimilate any of the benefits of Western culture. And that's what I push back on these pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian Middle East or, supporters of the Middle East and say, like, what's your favorite part of Islam? Like, what's your favorite practice? Is it the female genital mutilation? Is it the complete removal of females' rights and autonomy? Is it the cutting off of the hands in response to theft? I mean, what is your favorite Islamic practice? That they do well, that you think we should bring to the West. And the UK is a perfect example of what not to do. Yeah, I mean, so this, I think America should be looking at what's happening in London and seeing this invasion, and they are on the brink of civil war in that country. A lot of people believe it's already begun. And we're headed in the same place. And Tim Walz is one of these sort of like ivory tower politicians who's trying to tell you nothing to see here, everything's fine.
So, well, and then let me ask you too, because yesterday, Zuckerberg came out with his, oh my gosh, I knew I was, they made me. And I'm like, why is he coming out now? Is it because they arrested the Telegram guy and he's scared?
100%.
Or is this another acorn? Because I lived it. I used to have a page called Panhandle Loves Trump. And actually last year it disappeared. I did not cancel it because it was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then all of a sudden it was gone because, he came out saying, oh, we're not going to have Facebook as politics. And then I love X because, like I said, I'm a baby Xer and that's where we belong because we're on fire there. But yesterday I was like, what is this? And then somebody posted a meme, and it was, because I was like, oh, he's the canary singing, and it was a picture of his face on a body of a canary with his mouth open, and it was awesome. So why all of a sudden does he think he's going to get arrested, Josh?
I don't know about that, but I listen, I think it's as simple as this. I think these people see which way the wind is blowing. And I had a tweet go viral over the weekend about the RFK effect. Like, what I've noticed on the ground here in Los Angeles is there are so many people who were like never Trumpers, who now that their favorite candidates, and this is the thing, a lot of people think like everyone in California loves Kamala Harris. A lot of people don't. Almost everyone I know was on the RFK train, who weren't on the Trump train.
Okay.
And now that he's gone over, and they're sort of faced with the staunch reality that like this isn't Democrat and Republican. This is good versus evil. And when people from all political parties are teaming up on one side to say that the Democrat empire is trying to end this country, you really quickly you have to make a gut decision of like, who are the good guys here? And I think people are waking up to the fact that it's becoming harder and harder to identify who the good guys are, or to pretend that these aren't the good guys. And so I think Zuckerberg is just the most high profile example of that, of like, hey, I've been wrong about this the entire time. And I've been playing this game like it's the Democrats and Republicans that my parents talked about in the 70s and 80s. It isn't that anymore. It is government that's still trying to serve the people, and government that has only intention to serve itself. And regardless of what you thought the labels were, or what you thought the teams were before, if you're not waking up to it, you're going to be on the losing side. And that could mean very, very bad things for you. Like, Zuckerberg's probably looking, 4 or 5 years down the road and going like, if I don't course correct, Facebook will die. Like, this platform will die because we've been propagators of misinformation, and we've been a propaganda arm for the bad guys, for evil. So if we don't turn coat and start doing the right thing,
that's shocking to me.
Well, Josh, it's interesting because it's the Democrat. I won't even call it the Democrat machine. It's a machine. It's machine politics. And I heard a very good analysis of this the other day. It doesn't. Kamala Harris is irrelevant to this. She is just the placeholder, and it actually started with Obama. Obama came out of nowhere. No accomplishments, nothing.
Yeah,
and he beat Hillary Clinton. And that wasn't a coincidence. It was this machine that got cranked up and said, we want this guy, and he's an empty suit. And what did everybody, what was Obama to the voters? He was a blank slate. He was a reflection of what they wanted. And that's exactly what they're playing to. People sit there and say, well, who's Kamala Harris? And she's all these things to everybody, and she's nothing to anyone.
Yeah, he was a manifestation of a century of American white guilt. And I think a lot of people, without even digging into his qualifications, thought, wow, you know what? If we elect a black president, maybe this will all be done. And then they realized it only made things worse.
And it was awful. So I don't know. So where do we go from here? I mean, I watched your stuff and I was laughing, about, you were talking about, you hit everybody, which is funny. You were talking about white people, black people, you said something about Asians and taking tests, and I was dying about that.
Oh yeah. I was, the entire special I just released on
which
July 4th called, thank you. It's called Goliath, and it's really about identity, right? And the concept of Goliath for me kind of came out in the sense of, I think when we hear these stories, and the David and Goliath story is a great example. Like, we always think of ourselves as the good guy, and nobody ever thinks they're Goliath. Like, nobody ever thinks like, oh, I'm the sacrificial murder that's designed to keep everybody else in line. And so I really kind of identified with that side of the story, or looking at it from a different perspective as it pertained to my own story about like sort of being sacrificed as if you want to work in entertainment and you don't play ball, we'll execute you in front of all of the people, to serve as an example. And so, but the whole special is really about, the idea of who we think we are. And I try to poke fun at a little bit of all of that across the board, whether it be gender ideology or racial ideology. And, I think if you if you think you're trans or gay or black over your Mark and Rebecca, or whoever you are as an individual, then you're lost and you lack purpose and perspective in your life. And there's a lot of things about who I am, my race, my sexual orientation, all that. None of that stuff comes up when people go, tell me who you are as a person. That's not even at the forefront of my mind. And I think that's where we've gone wrong as a society. And that's what I try to poke fun at in the special.
Yeah, no, I loved it because you talked about your parents' divorce and then your mom married a black guy. And so you had a white and a black dad. And it's so funny when you think about it because, some Americans sometimes were so naive on these things. I had a foreign mother from Spain and she would answer the phone. Back in the day, we didn't have cell phones and I would go to answer, hi. And they're like, who's that Chinese woman living in your house? They were so confused by it. Well, so how's it going out in LA? Because I've just fallen in love with the pro-lifer comedian and your stuff is really funny and I would come see you, for sure. So we just
I try to get out and travel. Yeah, I definitely get out to Florida. I was out there a couple times last year. I did the roast of Brandon Strauch back in November down in Palm Beach. I do a lot of stuff with Brandon and the Walkaway movement. And then, I did a couple shows down there with Anthony Cumia and Gavin McInnes in the summer of last year. So I'm just kind of off touring now for a few months while I'm building new material to go out and tour with. And then I'll definitely be out on the road and seeing all of you guys in Florida and hopefully in the rest of the Southeast because there's, a huge following for the kind of stuff I do down there. And
oh my gosh, yes.
Texas,
we welcome you.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what parts of the country do you get a better reception than others? Is the South more open to the comedy than say the West Coast with the elites and stuff? And
well, I get this question a lot about why I haven't left LA because I'm so ideologically opposed here. But I actually find that keeps me sharp. I think for me to really be able to ridicule the bad ideas, I have to live around them and see them every day. I think it makes me a better comedian than somebody who moves. Like if I move to where you guys live, if I'm in Florida, everyone's going to think like me and agree with me. So there's really nothing to ridicule and mock. So I like being here in the belly of the beast. But I'll tell you this, aside from politics, there's also this movement in comedy where people are just absolutely sick and tired of being told what they're allowed to laugh at. So I'll do shows here in Los Angeles and I don't change the act for
You're
an LA
edgy.
crowd.
You are edgy.
Yeah. And it goes over just as well here because I've even had I've had trans, people would be shocked to know how many trans and gay fans I have that will come up to me after the show and go, whether I agree with you or not, you make a very funny case for your point of view, and I can still enjoy it and laugh at it. And there's no hate behind these jokes. It's really just about trying to ridicule everybody and to say, there is a silly way you can look at this thing, and you can't deny that. Part of acceptance is you have to admit that what you're doing is kind of crazy, right?
Very true. So is there one character in real life, Kamala? You haven't talked about Newsom, who he wasn't even allowed on the stage to give a speech. That was shocking to me. So he must be wounded. But is there
he was out picking up garbage,
that you love the most in the political arena? Is there anybody that it's just you're dying to write a joke about?
Oh, well, I could write so many about some of these people. And I'll do I'll have a lot of, I really don't do a lot about specific political things. Mm-hmm. I try to stick more to the cultural effects in my act. The next hour I'm working on is all about the cult of self-improvement and all these narcissistic things we do in the name of bettering ourselves that are really just a form of psychological masturbation.
Are there some Ozempic jokes? There's got to be some Ozempic jokes.
Oh yeah. Well, and as a big guy who's trying to lose weight now, and my weight has fluctuated everything throughout my life. I joke with people, that I go I wish fat shaming worked on me. I wish I wish that some of my self-worth came from how I looked. It just doesn't. It's never been like that for me. Like I've never, and some of that I think comes from being a redhead. Like there's no amount of getting in great shape that's ever going to make you not a ginger for the people who find us disgusting. So I've never gotten self-worth from that. So when people are like, "Hey, fat ass," I'm like, "Yeah, I like to eat." Well, what's your question? Like, it's not a,
That's
it
why you had
doesn't
a food
hurt
show.
my feelings.
Well, I think
Yeah, I had a food show. Yeah.
what pushes me over the edge is when you see the skinny starlets, which I'm sure you see out there, and now they're doing Ozempic to be even skinnier, and I'm like, well, that's really good.
They look sickly, you know, and that's the thing that's crazy, like, you know, and this is where you have to be willing to acknowledge, like, you know, I think the body positivity movement started from a good place. Like we should be looking at somebody, and I'll just use an example of a very famous young actor now, but you should look at somebody like a Florence Pugh and go, okay, that's a healthy person who maybe doesn't have the current stereotypical idyllic body. She's built more like a gymnast. She's a bigger butt and she's kind of small upstairs. Right. But that's a normal, healthy, attractive.
Yeah, I've seen her.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't be trying to push somebody like that to be zombie thin and get a boob job and everything else. But we also shouldn't be telling Lizzo that like everything's fine. You know
exactly. That's what I would think.
And I would never be like one of these. Yeah, I would never be one of these fats that goes on TV and is like, everything about me is healthy. You know what I mean? But like, I don't drink, I don't do drugs. Like, so there's a reason why.
She can dance though. For a big girl,
yeah.
she's like, wow. Because I don't have a dancing gene at all, and I'm not at that. You know, she's pretty amazing with her dance moves. Well, we want to free you from L.A. I don't know how you're surviving it out there. You know, I guess people love you, and then when I see your stuff, I'm like, wow, this guy needs to be like the next Everybody Loves Raymond kind of guy. So is that something you'd want to do, is get into acting as well?
Well, I don't think it's in the cards. I mean, if you were to ask me whose career I would love to emulate,
yes.
probably my favorite comedian working today. I mean, my favorite of all time as a stand-up is George Carlin. My favorite career example is Robin Williams. I mean, I get into debates with people all the time that I think Robin Williams was a better actor than the De Niros and the Pacinos and everybody.
Robin Williams in Vegas, but I was mortified because it was such an X-rated show. And I wasn't expecting that, and I was there with my husband, and we were both looking at each other. My favorite's actually Jerry Seinfeld because he's always clean and he's so funny. I've seen him so many times because he does travel to little venues, I will say.
Yeah, but my favorite working today is Ricky Gervais, and I think in his stand-up he pulls no punches. In his filmmaking, he made a movie 10 years ago or so that I think is one of the best. If you haven't seen it, it's called The Invention of Lying. And the thing I love about Ricky is a great example of somebody who, if you look at the people Ricky follows on X, he follows about 1,000 people, and I'm one of them. And one of the things I appreciate is his perspective is, even though we very much disagree on religion, we can appreciate each other's perspective. And the way he discovered me was talking about that movie, The Invention of Lying, and saying, like, this is a real human look from an atheist perspective on the value of religion, whether you believe in it or disagree with it or not, right? And he was really trying to make a case for, like, who cares if it's real? If it makes people feel good, then it's ultimately a good thing. And I thought, like, that's a pretty great thing for a person to do with their art, to be able to say, like, let me make a movie understanding this thing that I'm not for or that I don't believe in, right? And I thought that was a real genius piece of work. And then we sort of started a bit of a pen pal relationship through X based on that. And so, I look at somebody like that and think, like, he can make the side that he doesn't agree with funny and interesting and heartfelt. And I think that's the true mark of a real great talent.
Well, and I think maybe with RFK joining our side, that word unification is possible because, when I was the Trump chair, the haters like hate you, and there's never that. We can't just, be friends because we don't like the same ideology. So hopefully, we'll come back around. But oh my gosh, Josh, I just am in love when I meet people that are fighting for the unborn, and that is you. I hope you're a warrior. And that's why I was like, oh my gosh, I have to have him on.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and it's not something I ever like sought out to be. It was never in the cards for me to be like, I'm going to be one of these like vocal pro-life people. But I feel like when God calls you to your purpose, you have to answer whether you feel like that's what you're good at or what you're supposed to do or not. And if my ability to be rational and make good arguments can change the minds of people to what I ultimately think is the right thing to do, then I have a responsibility to society to try to do that. And if I can do it with good debate or healthy debate or good discussion, or I can do it with flame-throwing comedy that ridicules people for bad ideas, then I'll do either of those things to try to help steer us in the right direction. And I think that's what made George Carlin great was, regardless of what his personal opinion was, he always made specials and had material that I think challenged society to better itself, and I think that's why he's one of the greatest of all time.
When you mentioned George Carlin, his discussions on race relations were just astonishing to me. I mean, it was just you couldn't do it any better. As far as breaking down like what is an African American, and stuff like that, and it's just it was always done in good taste. It wasn't nasty, but the truth was in there always.
Yeah, and I love what you said about that, because I talk about race a lot in my act, and on our podcast we do it a lot, and I am most disgusted by the lack of authenticity around the discussion that people have. Like, we have this performative discussion around race where white people don't ever want to look like the bad guy, and black people take that guilt and use it to assert some undeserved moral high ground in the debate of ideas. And I think that stems from not only having like a couple years with a black step parent when I was a kid, and seeing that like the stereotypes that I was taught about black people didn't apply to everybody. I tell in the special, he was a veteran. His family was very important to him, but he also hated he hated the phrase African American. He thought it was like an asterisk next to American. And as a veteran, he was offended by it. And, he was very much like, yeah, don't tiptoe around calling me black. I'm black. That's what I am. But to say that I'm some sort of half American is I don't agree with it. And that was something I had not heard before he had told me that. And I think that sent me into life with a curiosity to sort of challenge the status quo around how we talk about race. And we're very bullish about it. And we'll get into debates with people about usage of the N-word in art and everything. And I had a very, very highly watched podcast in 2018 about this with somebody from TMZ about, the usage of the word in art and culture and everything. And for me, it's just about being real, and if that's how people really speak, then let's address it head on. Let's not pretend like there's nothing I hate more. And this came from moving from Philadelphia as a teenager to Minnesota. And in Philadelphia, everybody was like racist to each other, but almost in like a loving and endearing and confrontational and open way. And then I went to Minnesota where nobody ever said the wrong things, but they were twice as insidious about what they meant. And so I learned at a very young age, like, oh, words are irrelevant and intention is everything. And so you can be around somebody who's calling someone a racial slur and they're doing it out of love and they're hugging and they're making fun of each other. And you can be around somebody in the Midwest who says all the right things and never uses bad language, and they hate you and they think you're subhuman. And so that for me really changed the way I address the whole language discussion in America and being free speech. Is like, if you're just listening to the words and you're not paying attention to the person, you're going to be completely misled on who the good guys and the bad guys are.
Right. So,
and that certainly sums up modern politics.
Exactly. So, final question: your thoughts on Elon Musk? I just find that he's a free speech, founder of free speech, and it's just such a blessing that he's taken over X, and I feel like I found my platform, even though I keep ending up in jail. So your thoughts on X as a baby Xer here?
Well, I feel so good about it because I kind of invested all of my eggs into the Twitter X basket. I think Instagram is more of a visual medium, and I think my words are probably where I provide the most value. So I always put the most effort into X and built my fan base on Twitter and now X. And so I'm just happy from that perspective, from a selfish degree, that's now the free speech platform, because that's the one that I built a fan base on. But I mean, I think when we look back on this in 20 or 30 years, we're going to have to recognize Elon Musk as one of the saviors of America, because
I'm telling you, and RFK Jr.
for
after Friday.
Yeah, I mean, for these guys, I talked about this on the Punch Bowl this morning, where I said, RFK's wife is probably, her career is over. Like, for her husband, it's one thing for her husband to run against Democrats and her to be a Hollywood actress, but for him to then endorse Trump, and I know she's tried to distance herself from it, but like,
right.
There is no turning back at this point for her. And I think we have to look at these people like RFK and his family and Elon Musk, who've made great personal sacrifice, and Elon monetary sacrifice, to try to preserve America and do the right thing. I mean, we should have statues to these people in 20 years for what they're doing, because I think without Elon Musk and without RFK and the Dream Team, Tulsi Gabbard, I'll throw in there as well, who are assembling behind Trump. Yeah, and assembling behind Trump and the messaging of restoring America to what we all want. I think without those people, it would be lost forever.
But wasn't it funny? When Elon was hosting Trump and like the EU didn't want him to do it, the White House didn't want to do it. Because I know the other issue you fight hard too is for the freedom of speech and everything I saw on your X, Josh. So that was the funny thing. They didn't want him to have this an interview. Give me a break.
Well, this goes back to the Jimmy Fallon thing. Remember when Jimmy Fallon got crucified for tussling his hair and everyone was mad that he humanized Trump? That's what this is all about. I mean, their entire specter of Trump is a lie. And if you get to see who the man really is, they will not be able to continue to lie. And that's the thing, is like these videos of him going into, like a Chick-fil-A in Atlanta and like dancing with the black ladies behind a counter and stuff like, that's Trump.
Real.
That's who he's been real. For like, yes, that's who he's been for 60 years. And it's amazing to me, the veil that's been pulled over America's eyes, because for majority of my life, Donald Trump was the poster boy for America. There were three things that were unequivocally American. If you ask like a Russian immigrant, give me America in three brands, they would go McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Donald Trump. Like that would be the three things that were symbolism of America. And the minute this guy challenged the machine, he's a rapist, he's a racist, he's evil, he's the devil. And that's why they don't want you to hear him speak or see, like the Theo Von interview. Can we talk about that? That was the most humanizing, awesome thing I've ever seen a president done. And you saw in that interview how much Trump took an interest in Theo and his story with addiction and everything else. And you got to realize, like, this is a man who cares greatly about people and cares greatly about this country.
Yeah, because why would you be running with all of the BS and all the fake cases and fake news? I mean, I feel awful for the man.
They tried to kill him.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the press wants us to forget that. And it's only been 6 weeks. It's so awful.
Josh, one quick one I wanted to ask you about. Do you think that, like, what happened with RFK and what's going on with Trump, that people like Nicole Shanahan, who was his VP pick, she's like a liberal, rich person, San Francisco, all that kind of stuff. And she has had a real swing in where her politics are now. I mean, she's not a Democrat fan anymore.
Yeah, you're seeing. Well, that's what I said earlier about people are waking up to the fact that this isn't like the Bill Clinton era Democrats and Republicans, right? Like, this is good American values and an empirical, self-preserving war machine. Like, I don't know if you guys watched the movie Civil War. It's directed by Alex Garland,
right,
who did Annihilation and Deus Ex Machina. And he's had a couple of misses lately, and Civil War wasn't a huge thing, but I actually thought it was very realistic about what this country would become if the Democrats stayed in power, because I think when people saw the title of that and saw that it was a movie about American Civil War, they thought, oh, it's going to be the typical leftist portrayal, like it's going to be rednecks trying to fight America. And it's actually about all of Americans banding together against a corrupt government and the president, played by Nick Offerman, was like drone striking American citizens. And in the film, California, Texas, and Florida band together to like take the country back. And I was like, this is most likely, if we do come to civil war, what will happen is it won't be black versus white or Christians versus liberals. It will be the American people against its own government, because they have gotten corrupt, and it's only a matter of like how far they're willing to go to hold on to power, and a lot of people are like, why is Kamala Harris not doing press? And why is she not trying? It seems like she's not trying to win the presidency. That doesn't concern me because it shows that she's unqualified. It concerns me because it makes me believe that they have no plan to see this thing through to an election, and that they might do anything to prevent an election from taking place and to preserve power. And we could be at the precipice of this moment in society where there is no more tricking yourself that government isn't corrupt. You know what I mean? Like, and I say this about January 6th, and I've been a very vocal advocate and supporter of trying to help my friends who were, I think unconstitutionally prosecuted for January 6th. That fence didn't stay up around there, around the Capitol for months because of what did happen. I think they kept it up because what these government people know they deserve. They know they've screwed the American people. They know they've lined their own pockets with bad policy and corruption. And they know that this reckoning is coming. And the best case for America is that it comes in the form of a Trump win and not the war that will happen if they prevent this election from happening.
So, Josh, I am going to be your new campaign manager for when you run for Congress, because that was an awesome stump speech. And you're a comedian, but holy crap, you should be a politician. Oh,
I know, I get told that all the time.
I'm like saluting. I'm standing at attention saluting. That was so amazing. So I hope it was okay with you coming on talk. I mean, it was definitely a serious conversation, but I do want to vector people to go find you on X. It's Josh Denny, Denny, and you've got your Josh Denny. Is it comedian? Was it comedian.com?
JoshDennyComedy.com.
Okay, there we go. And they've got to watch Goliath because it's quite good. And I was laughing because I could be one of your routines up there. My husband always talks about my walk-in closet and how it's a hazard zone. So, but such a pleasure, and we'll be calling to have you back. Because you're one of the good guys out there, and we're rooting for you. And I need that Food Network show. So I hope you bond with Mel Gibson and his Icon Productions or whatever, and come to the South, because we're God, guns, country, and sweet tea. So we'll protect you.
Always welcome
and
here.
Host you.
Yeah, what's better than that? Yeah, I definitely want to get down there. I mean, my podcast co-host is a Florida native, and big fan of the University of Miami. He played Division I college football at FAU.
My son's a Hurricane grad. I love the U. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. We'll
play.
Definitely be down there. It's just a matter of when.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll be following you, and I'll share this podcast with you. And such an honor and pleasure. And thanks for being that pro-life warrior. And you've been on Veronica Live. So thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Okay.